Alright, now I built a blog API project using NestJS, and now I want to use environment variables instead of using the configuration stuff as a plain string in here, right? I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to use that in a environment variables and configure from that file, right? So the first thing to do is actually npm install, because I cloned this project from GitHub, so we have not node modules yet. So let's install it, but that's not about our topic. Just ignore it. So yeah. Alright, done. Now, I want to create a .env file, and I will put all the configuration string in here. Well, we have port, right, and port will be 3000, and we have JWT secret, and it's going to be 1 to 3, like for not production, of course, and we will have Mongo URI string, and it's going to be MongoDB localhost block DB. Alright, perfect. Now, how do we load these variables into our project? Because currently it's just a variable inside the environment, right? Well, in Express.js applications or Node.js, like pure Node.js applications, we use .env package, and after we install it, we just say require .env.config to load the variables from the .env files, right? But in NestJS application, we don't use .env package directly. Instead, we use a package called NestJS/config, and this module basically includes .env underneath it, right? So, right, this is the core package, like the .env package core package that enables us to like play with the env files. And just nest config package gives us more I don't know, like more modularity structure to play with in our application, right? So just enough talking, right? Let's see them in action, because you can learn nothing without the action, without the practice. So just let's do it. So we need to install it. npm install NestJS config. This is the package name. And I will just close this VS Code and open that again, because sometimes it doesn't load the variables, I mean packages, doesn't matter. So here at the top of every module, like in the import part, I'm gonna come here and say config module that's for root. So with this method, we basically load everything from the .env file, right? And we can access all these variables using the process.env and the variable name, right? But it's not a NestJS type of thing. Instead, NestJS will assign all these variables to the config service, and we will use config service to interact with those variables, right? So with that way, I don't know what's the advantage of that, but that's how we do that in NestJS, right? So that's it, okay. But one thing to know is, we don't want to get all those things here and put it in the config source directly. Instead, we want to create a configuration file and put all those things in here and then use them from this configuration file. Let me show you what I'm trying to say. Well, I'm gonna create a config file here, config.ts file in the source directory, and we will have export const. It's going to be config, right? And here I'm basically going to get those things. So I'm going to say port is going to be process env, process env port. But if there's no port, I'm going to using 30, or let's say 500. And for GWT secrets, I'm going to say like that, process env GWT, let's copy that here, like this. So process env, and it's going to be Mongo URI. Now we're exporting it automatically here with that keyboard. So now we somehow need to say that, hey NestJS, we want to use this configuration file to interact with the environment variables. So in the for root methods, I'm going to specify a few things. First, I'm just going to say load, and it will ask me to specify where I'm going to load those things. And I'm just going to say config. This is my config from the config, right? And it will basically load those things, right? And also, I want to say that is global set to true. It will basically enables us to use these environment variables in every module, because otherwise, if you don't set it to true, we can only use environment variables within the app module, not in the auth module or blocks module or something, right? So that's what we say is global set to true. Okay, we're loading from config, and now we can use those things using config service. So let me show you real quick. We need to use a port, right? So let's try to apply it to port. Our port is specified in the main.ts, which is the entry point file, and in here, after we create the app variable, I'm going to say const config service, and it's going to be config service. Let me check that. Get config service. It will be something like that. app.get config service. Right. And I'm just going to say const port, and using this config service instance, I can now access the get method, of course, and inside of the get method I can specify these keys, right? So let's pick the port, and I'm gonna put it on here. So that's it. Now we can just replace this 3000 with the port. Great. Now if we run our application, it should run in and just because we have ports enabled, ports, we declare the ports, so it's going to run in port 3000. So let's check this. I'm just going to say port 3000, and let's send a request here. Right. What's the problem? Why? Oh yeah, just because we're just trying to use MongoDB in our project, but we haven't connected to MongoDB yet, because we have the connection string, but my database lives on a Docker container, and Docker container is just shut down. Let's start again, and it should work. Alright, now it's connected. Perfect. Now it should work. Yeah, hello world. It's working in port 3000 because our port is defined as 3000 in the environment variables, and then we load them to the config file with the help of this for root methods, and then we just say if there's a environment port, then use it, but if not, just use 5000. So if I just delete this port, it will start to run in port 5000. So let's try the same thing again, and it should work because we changed the ports. It should work in port 5000 now, exactly. But you got the point. Let's move on. Let's get that back. Great. So now the next thing is JWT secret, right? So we need to use this config service in our auth module where we define where we register our JWT module, right? This is where we register, where we create the JWT module. Like we basically register it, and after we use the module register, like NestJS put everything that we give in the register part to the service, right? JWT service. So in here, in the secret part, we need to use this config. So, but how we can inject this source, right? We need to somehow inject the source. Well, it's not a class right now, because normally if we were in a class, like something like this, we would put it in a constructor, right? Just like we were doing here. But now it's not a... Oh man, it's gone. It's not a... What is that, bro? That. Right. But currently we're not in a class, so we need to use another technique. I'm gonna use register async, and inside of this function, we're just gonna change a few things. First, we will have inject, and inside of this inject, we will basically inject the config source. Maybe that config source, and that's it. And after that, we will have a factory, use factory, and in here we will have a async function, and inside of this parentheses, I'm going to create the instance from this config source. Config service, config source. And, well, let me check that. We need to use an arrow here. And yeah. Now we can specify our secret. And the secret will be coming from the config service get, and the name is JWT secret. So that's it. That's basically it, right? We basically inject the config service and then create an instance from it and access the get method to get it from the config module in the background, right? Because when we, as I said, when we load it from here, we basically get this config file, and this config file, you know what, how this works? Let me show you. When we use this for root, we basically load all the environment variables to process env objects, and in a file, doesn't matter which file it is, we create a k value pairs, and we basically assign those process env objects to these things, and that basically makes it more easy to use, right? And then inside of this here, we basically say load this config file. I don't want to deal with process env object in every module, right? Instead, just get that config, and from now on I'm going to use those things within the config service. And when we create an instance from this config service, we can use those config keys, right? That's the whole thing going on in the background. Great, let's move on. we're done with the JWT service for the register part, but we're not done yet actually, because we need to go to strategy, JWT strategy, and change the secret or key part as well. So in order to inject this service, we can actually use it in the constructor, right? Because we're in a class and we have a constructor. So we can say, well, private config service config service. Great. Now I can use this config server just like I did here. Like the only difference is we don't have constructor class here, so we use factory and inject stuff. We inject it and then create an instance from this, right? Basically it. And in here we inject it and create an instance, and in here I can use it. Config service. We have the get method, and we will get it from this name. Not here, this one. Now, perfect. If I go to Postman and send a request to auth register, it should work. Yep. Perfect. DB, and we have a lot of users, and here the last one we just created now. So that's all about with JWT. Now let's do the same thing for the Mongoose, right? For the MongoDB connection. So our Mongoose registered in the main module file, which is the app module file. So instead of using the ctrink here, I want to use from the env, not actually env, but from this config file, because we're loading all these env to these keys, and I want to use this Mongo URI. So in order to do that, we need to inject the config service, because, like, as I said, all these variables assigned to config service in the background. So we need to somehow inject it. Well, as we did in here, we need to say inject and then use a use factory. So let's do that. I'm just going to delete that because we're just going to get from the environment. I'm just going to say for root async, and we will have inject, not like that, inject root async Mongoose module. Let's put it in here. Inject config service use. Oh yeah, I got it. We need to say we need to put a curly braces here. Exactly, just like we did here. Yeah, exactly. So now I'm going to say inject. It's going to be our config service, which contains all the environment variables in it, and we will have a use factory. Why it doesn't work, man? Use. Okay, now just use factory, and it's going to be async, and we will get the instance from here. We'll get this like that, config service, and we will have a parameter called URI, and this is for specifying the URI units. We can basically type in as a string, but the purpose of here is just getting from the environment variables. That's because, like, we inject it and get the instance, so we need to say config secret and get, and we want to get the Mongo URI from here. Now it should connect. It's perfect. Now it's fully working, right? Let's register for John, and it's fully working. Perfect. And now instead of like using it in our source code, we pulling all these variables, environment variables from the .env file, right? And when we go from localhost to production server, we can easily configure those variables from one file. That's the whole thing. That's the whole purpose, right? But that's it. We register config module and load the config file from here and get the environment variables from this file, and then we make it global to use in all the modules, and then we inject the config service and create an instance from it, and using the get method we basically get the case values and use it in anywhere we want. That's basically it. And one thing for you to pay attention is just initialize this config module before all these modules in the main module file, right? Because like if for example auth module would come before this one, our JSON web token wouldn't work, I guess. Let's try this. It's working. I don't know why, but it's global because we set it to is global, yeah. But if I remove it, yeah, it's not working, yeah. Like because we need to use global, like is global true, set to true. We need to set it to true because otherwise we cannot use those config stuff from config service outside of this module, right? And that's why we would get an error. So that's the basic of using environment variables in a NestJS application. Like similar to ExpressJS, but instead of using .env directly, we use .env as an internal package inside of the NestJS module, and we register our module, and then we pull all these environment variables from the .env file, and then we use it from the config service, right? That's basically the whole thing. And now I'm going to learn how to use the environment variables in a Docker Compose YAML file. And like with that way, we can basically deploy our application to different environments, but by using their like configuration environment variables with one file, with one command, right? We're just only going to define environment variables from one place instead of just putting all those things in different places in our source code. That's the beauty of environment variables. And hopefully you learn it, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye bye.